USA Info, Jolanta Sitasz-Wójcicka, Patagonia, Jadwiga Pisarska, Released from Theory, Monika Miłowska, Fudge Lab, Anna Miller, Start NGBT, Magdalena Jabłonowska, Lotos Petrobalczyk, Jolanta Szydłowska, GFKM, Gdańsk Foundation for Development of Managers, and Leviathan Section for Females Progress at Pomeranian Voivodeship couldn't join us. Daria Ulianicka with Integralia Foundation, Ergo Hestie, Agnieszka Płoska, expert of crowdfunding, and Małgorzata Greszta, CSR Consulting, and Michał Mikołajczyk, Recouple. All this in the sessions module. Now please, the participants who join us on the Hopin platform, to follow the instructions which are provided on the chat functionality. And in 2 minutes, we carry on with this forum. We need to organize ourselves on the main stage. So we are going to hold a 5-minute technical break, and we are going to come back very soon indeed. Thank you.
Dźwięk? Jest. Witamy po przerwie wszystkich Państwa i
Welcome after the
forum
break, ladies and gentlemen. And now it's time we started the Integration and Immigration Forum, which is a project run by the City of Gdańsk, which focuses on the integration of children and adolescents with international migration experience. And now I'm addressing the online audience. Please choose the stage option on Hopin, then choose your language. The interpretation into English and Russian is available on YouTube, on Fera Foundation, and the entire broadcast will also be available on gdańsk.pl website. I would like to invite Ms. Monika Habior, Deputy Mayor of the City of Gdańsk for Social Development and Equal Opportunities. Ms. Mayor, please take the stage. Good afternoon, and welcome to all those who've joined us here physically and who've joined us remotely via the internet. I'm delighted to see this event. Integration and Immigration Forum is something that we've been organizing cyclically. We have seen you in conferences and many conferences on many occasions. Today the formula is a bit different, and we're going to focus on a single aspect, i.e. the schooling and integration aspect of children, but also to reach out to the parents and support teachers, teaching assistants, and to integrate the systemic approach in such a manner that the school is the place of actual integration and good experience of development and learning for children with migration experience, i.e. those children who were brought up abroad as Poles who come here as migrants or persons who have come from third countries of different nationalities who are going to experience their youth in Poland. In Gdańsk schools, we have around 2,000 children, migrant children, but how many with migrant experience, we don't know yet, because it's this living aspects of experience, and this migration to Poland and Gdańsk is a very important experience, because in the past few years we know that around 2 million people have migrated to Poland, and it's a challenge for us so that our state, our communities and specific institutions can cope in supporting all of us in developing an integrated society, because each and every person has something to contribute. We've got something to contribute, and all those persons who come here have something to offer, because had it not been the case, they wouldn't have come here. So I'm delighted to see that today's meeting is dedicated to education, because our model, which has been functioning for quite a few years now, 5 to be exact, also requires some amendment to management. In the past, the development of the model was a very participatory process in nature, and we were wondering how to approach the topic of migration. 170 persons had worked long-term to develop the model. Then we set out to implement it, and we've garnered some experience from schools, which we're going to debate today. But we've also got experience of the Employment Office, and also the Center for the Support of Migrants, and also the local authorities, and we've had some experience with the businesses. And all these experiences require us to consider the management of this model anew, and to prioritize some aspects. For me, a priority is schools. And it's great that today we are going to see this report from a study that was commissioned last year, which study, using design thinking method, allowed the so-called stakeholders, i.e. pupils, teachers and parents and authorities, to sit down and think what could be done better. How a variety of persons experience migration in our schools, what they expect, what's difficult for them, and what our task list could be, and what still jobs we need to do. And I believe this report has been compiled in such a way that it lists such tasks or objectives. Some of such tasks are easy to implement, relatively. Others will be harder to do so, but it's great that we're starting with the knowledge. And now we could divide those tasks to those which are feasible in the short term and those that require more of an effort. And it's clear that schools, even if the local authorities are the governing bodies, schools are not 100% run by the governing authority, be it public or non-state entity, because we know that school and school functioning is very much determined by state policies. That also means that the task list we have got might be restricted by what is determined by the state level. We, who deal with migration, we have this awareness and we clearly articulate the need for what in Poland needs to take place as a state with regard to integration policies. It's clear that Poland needs a long-term migration and integration policy which hasn't been in place, and without which integration policies on local authorities level and all those challenges we take on the border, at least now, cannot be delivered upon in a structured manner. And we also believe, all of us here, but also you can share your observations with us, that the activities and the instruments we've got on the state level could also be organized and fine-tuned better to respond to the needs of schools. So I believe today we are going to focus on the challenges, but also on the best practices, because we've developed quite a few best practices in Gdańsk and in Pomerania as a whole, and we hope and these best practices will serve as a starting point as this extending patchwork which will mediate the implementation of policies. So I'd like to thank you to the Foundation of Development and Initiation that has developed this study, and I'm looking forward to hearing from all the commenting persons. And next year when we meet, we hope to be able to say that we have delivered upon some objectives and that we have actually also made such best practices more prevalent.
Thank you, Madam President. I know you have yourself an immigration experience. You've worked in the UK for several years before coming here to Poland, and I'd like you to stay for a moment because Madam President wanted to share a gift with you. Using this opportunity that you, representing the city authorities, who for the past 10 years have been a partner of our forum, I'd like to hand in this house for insects, a symbolic token, and that both in terms of immigration or collaboration that you offer this cross-sectoral support, same way this house will support the insects that will inhabit it. Thank you, and I'll keep you informed about the progress. And now we'd like to invite you to listen to a mini lecture by Ms. Paulina Pawlicka from University of Gdańsk, titled Clashing with New Reality. Paulina Pawlicka, PhD, is a psychologist at the Intercultural Psychology and Kind Psychology and Gender Psychology at the Psychology Department. She also holds workshops on identity and national and cultural identities. Thank you for this invitation. As an introduction to our debate, I'd like to offer a psychological perspective in a situation. I apologize for the technical difficulties. Okay, let's try a different approach. So, the clashing with new reality, that is, when a family arrives at a new country, and the situation represents a change both for the family and for the children who go to a new school, but it also is a change for the school community itself. Hence, this perspective I'd like to present today in my lecture and in the panel is a comprehensive approach. First of all, the changes do take place. We are seeing a huge surge in the number of children with immigration experience. We've noted a threefold growth over the past years. So the change consists in basically not having a single school in Poland that would not have a child with immigration experience. So this experience is both something that the children, the teachers, and the headmasters share. The change consists on departing from a model that we've been used to and the cultural scripts that we've created through the years of living in a community and give us the sense of predictability and safety, give us also the sense of acting adequately to the circumstances. And this extends over a number of issues, from communication and knowing what to say and how to address others, and how to express your feelings, who should be shown respect, so as to preserve one's own social status, to very down-to-earth issues such as the sense of time and what does the moment actually mean. So we are leaving this safe environment in which we've grown, and in this sense we're departing from this internally secure model. Immigration, arriving at a new location, involves changes on multiple levels. From the physical one, change of climate, sunlight, microbiology, and factors that we perceive, and impulses, through social change, because when we arrive at a new location and we don't know how to handle ourselves, we switch to a functioning mode of a child who needs to learn everything anew. And for adults who migrate, this is a very challenging experience, because they lose the skills of the sense of competence, or reduce it greatly, and this affects the sense of worth or self-esteem. So it's a tangible change on all the levels of functioning, and in this sense it's a profound change and also an internal clash. In case of children, these changes also occur, but children rarely choose migration. It's usually the decision of the parents. Therefore, children are the ones who, percentage-wise, experience forced migration most often. They lose their friends from kindergarten, schools, their family members, extended family. They are just transplanted into a new school and have to find their way on their own. So this context of a child's perspective is very important to the migration-related experiences. So let's talk about the psychology of a situation in which we found ourselves in a new circumstances. Stress is a natural reaction, and this is called, or often referred to as culture shock or acculturation stress. And this is the natural reaction to all the changes that I've mentioned before, and it's a process of coping with stress. So we need to bear in mind that it's natural, but it takes time to overcome and requires also assistance. This dynamic of coping with the cultural adaptation situation follows a pattern of a U letter. So first, when we arrive, this is what we experience in any change. You don't need to visit a new country, but when we arrive in a new country, we may have a sense that everything is new and that everything will be okay, or that not much has changed since we're family, simply in a different spot. So this is the so-called honeymoon phase, in which we feel that in general everything will turn out just fine, and we'll certainly manage. So these are the feelings that bring hopes of changing things for the better, that the old problems are gone, and that we'll manage. However, when we start experiencing our presence in a new country, we start to face the differences and our reduced sense of agency. So we are not entirely sure how the offices work, how to make shopping, how schools function, and this translates to reduced sense of agency and increased stress levels. So from being an observer who witnesses how things functions, we shift to a role of a participant, and this period then changes to a phase in which we are starting to experience difficulties. We may have a more difficult emotional moments, and we get a sense that not everything works the way we want it to. And this phase is referred to as the culture shock. So a time in which we see a series of emotional reactions to crisis. So excessive emotional tension. We can tend to cry without any reason. We may be more nervous. We may feel that we don't want to stay at a given place any longer, or that we feel inclined to contacting with the receiving nation, since we see a lot of negative traits in them. So we have this sense of entrapment because we're halfway through, there is no turning back, and we need to handle the situation. This is a difficult time for many people. It occurs naturally, and the question is, how do we handle it? We know that the culture shock may accumulate, and there are a lot of factors that contribute to its duration. However, to adapt to a new culture, we need to overcome this difficult time, and this is where support is very important. Once we get over the shock, we have the acculturation phase, or adaptation, in which we start to find our place in this new community, and we seek ways of functioning well in this new community. So this is the acculturation and adaptation phase, and gradually we move to feeling better about our competencies. So the true adaptation takes place when we have the feeling of high quality of life and that we have managed to handle problems. And this does not mean that we do not see problems or other issues, but we are able to cope with them, and this gives this sense of agency. Of course, the world is not a fairy tale, and sometimes we get better and worse days, but in general we come to terms with and find our place, or find a place of our own in the new country. There are various manifestations of a culture shock. In children, they may reveal themselves after a time. Initially, the child can be well behaved and obedient and do their homework and try hard, and then a crisis comes and the children simply loses all motivations. The child may say they wish to no longer study Polish or go to school and enter a conflictive period of rebellion. And this is a difficult time both for teachers, for parents, and for the children itself. So we must be cautious to detect this phase, and we know that the mere fact of migration, especially the forced one, as is the case of children, entails an increased risk of depression. And this is a time where we have to be particularly vigilant and to the psychological status of children. When speaking of re-immigrants, that is, children who are born abroad but come back to Poland, they experience exactly the same sensations as the ones that we've mentioned, although the parents may see Poland as a home country. However, we follow exactly the same model, but for those who come back, we need to bear in mind that we follow a W-shaped pattern, meaning that the people go through this process twice. First, when they left, and secondly, when they come back and need to readapt themselves to the Polish culture. This is a difficult process. It takes time, sometimes half year, sometimes year or longer, sometimes shorter. So what determines the duration of the shock and adaptation? These are the personality traits. If someone is open to experience or is more psychologically robust, they can handle difficult situations more proficiently, and they have the capacity to rebound after crises. We can refer to it as the psychological resistance. And if someone had good family experience or significant family members experience history of, it's a great support both for children and adults, and social support is crucial both among the community of origin as well as the community which is the new home of the immigrant. And in case of adolescents, they often have numerous relations with persons who experience migration. In the context of different competencies that are significant for us, or better, let's move forward since we're running short of time. In the context of teachers, this model that we observed in the emotional phases of coping with change, we can see that it follows exactly the same pattern. The emotional reaction model is universal for everyone, and we experience it every day. For instance, when a meeting is postponed, or we first don't want to hear it and we do not put it in our agenda, and we thus try to avoid thinking about it, then we become nervous, and this is the resistance phase, because we're angry that all our plans have been upturned, and eventually we move on to reshaping our agenda. And the same happens with the schools. If a family with a migration experience comes to a school, these all emotions are felt by the teaching staff and the headmasters. They also need time to cope with the situation. They also need, since if we look at the manifestations of this resistance, we see that it manifests itself in coming in late, reluctance to take on additional tasks, and general resistance and lack of faith in any success of operations. We see also rebellion, or anger, and we also have the silent defiance of the teaching staff or headmasters, same as it happens in the case of the children.
Now it's fundamental that this resistance or rebellion is worked through. It's been talked about that this partnership is difficult to develop whenever we have a situation of conflict, i.e. we have different groups of different interests. Because actually, and this is the real difficulty, when we have a polarized manner of speaking and the debate is polarized, then we actually miss the essence. And the essence is anxiety, the anxiety to lose one's interests, to not cope. So those are all deep mechanisms. Or that we see no point in change for oneself. So we see the negatives, the downsides, but not the positives in the change and what positives this change could contribute. There's also a matter of demonstrating specific ways, and this panel sees this as an objective, and also the workshops, so to hear out all the parties and stakeholders in the process of working with children with migrant experience, and to assure that all these parties are catered to their needs. We also have the professional burnout that is experienced by the teaching faculty, and it's demonstrated in this emotional burnout, the teachers feeling just overburdened with their work. They often just have no idea what to do to deal with the situation. They very often feel they have no competencies to actually deal with such children with migrant experience who struggle to speak Polish or don't speak Polish at all. And it's a natural mechanism in the process, which often appears. It may not be clearly articulated, but it's a part of the psychological processes, this depersonalization, a failure to engage emotionally in the family or the child's situation. And this is a defense mechanism which often appears and then mediates this lack of interest by the teaching faculty or the school authorities in the situation of a family. And it is fundamental, and change on school level cannot be affected, or on the level of the community cannot be affected, without the contribution from the teaching faculty and without catering to the needs of the teaching faculty. And it's a challenge how to do it. Other institutions are necessary here, which will provide this stable support so that the teaching faculty know whom to refer to whenever an issue arises, so that they don't feel abandoned, because children with migrant experience can not only not speak Polish or struggle to speak Polish, but they, just like our own Polish children, they could be dyslexic, they could be on autism spectrum, they have a number of communication disorders, not only related to the language itself, so they could have a number of emotional difficulties that I've spoken about. So such parents and also teaching faculty must be supported so that they are not left to themselves. And actually, to conclude, this conclusion that this resistance to change is natural. And let's bear it in mind, it's not a sign of someone being unwillingness or not putting their shoulders to it. It's about them feeling anxious or feeling incompetent or not competent enough or overburdened. And we all need to notice such resistance. And I'm delighted to see this forum and that we developed this model. And now, as Madam Mayor has already said, it's moving on to the next stage, and it's being reviewed. And it is a meeting like this one that allows us to work and review on the stages of the model. Thank you very much for this highly edifying contribution. Thank you very much, Madam Doctor, for your lecture. In a moment, we're going to hold a brief technical break, and after, on the main stage, we are going to have the next stage of the Integration and Migration Forum, and we also have the virtual social economy fairs. Please come and visit. And obviously also use this Grivet application. You will find a number of virtual actual participants in the social economy, and you also see some challenges related to this industry and also related to our partners. Please try and play. And speaking of games and prizes, now we'd like to invite Ms. Iwona Kmicik and Ms. Chair Iwona Hinz. Iwona Kmicik represents one of the exhibitors, Natural Medicine Center Jantar, one of the very important sponsors. Now we should see the voucher. Good afternoon and welcome. I would like to thank you for this opportunity to contribute to this event. Fine. I walk out onto the stage. It is my pleasure to run Natural Medicine Center in this holistic approach for our mental and physical well-being, because we know only such approach could be successful. And we have prepared the main prize, which is a voucher for a 7-day stay, supporting mental and physical health aspects, which combines dietary therapy and phytotherapy, reflexology, and also stress reduction with mindfulness, everyday open air class. And we are only 600 meters away from the sea, so this aspect of bathing in the sea is part of the process, and also how to support healthy customs and routines following the therapy, but also how to follow a nutritious and healthy diet. So actually, it's a high stake and healthy stake, so this is something that you cannot buy, but you can actually achieve by developing healthy habits. And it's no accident that we have the dotted line on the voucher. And I believe Ms. Chair will talk you through the game. Perhaps not through the game, but something more about the prizes. We've also got more sets from Nowy Jantar Center. So we have an LPP bag and also LPP vouchers. But what's also fundamental, amongst the prizes, you'll find some provided by the entities of social economy. It could be the actual PR with a heart, actual cutting of the film, and other guests who joined us here in the studio. So really, the stakes are truly high.
Dziękujemy bardzo.
fantastic prizes.
Dziękujemy bardzo hojnym
To
sponsorom.
enjoy the games, we would like to thank the sponsors, and we appreciate their contributions, and also on behalf of the future winners. Now, we're going to hold a few minutes of break, a technical one, and then join us again to follow the further developments of this migration and integration forum. And in the meantime, we will just get this stage.
Jeszcze nie wchodzimy. Nie wchodzimy, już wchodzimy. Już się potykamy się. Już wchodzimy. Ponownie witamy Państwa na naszej
Welcome
scenie,
back
w naszym
after
studio.
the break.
Po drugiej stronie również.
We've been joined on the main stage as the next part of this integration and immigration forum, and it's school and integration, and at Expo also the touring of economy, social economy exhibitions. At 10 to 3 we'll try to finish on time. We're going to then invite you all to join us on the main stage, i.e. here, whereby we will hold a summary of the forum and also the announcement of the results of the gamification and a number of surprises. And now, allow me to introduce the guests, as today we have an all-female panel. We've been joined by Ms. Waja Japonowska with the Center for Migrant Support, Natalia Kowaliszyna, Intercultural Assistant, Valeria Puszkarowa, joined remotely by Justyna Kopodziarow, an independent migration expert, and Aleksandra Musielak, representing the Maritime School. Alexandra Monika, Brief Kids. The chair of the panel will be Agata Ciesielska. Agata is a moderator, and well, she's described mostly in English. She's a design thinking educator and researcher and historian of arts at the University of Gdańsk, and also postgraduate studies in design and management, in managing innovation at the University of Social Sciences, and she's run a number of workshops to international entities, business model, thinking institute, etc. She's been running personalized workshops for adults and children run with institutions of culture, and she's also one of the founding members, Service Design Network Poland. Agata will announce the results of a very interesting study, but now we give up the floor to Ms. Agata. Thank you very much. Our debate will arise partially from this report, which was compiled as a result of the cycle of workshops initiated by the city of Gdańsk, and we ran those workshops and we co-created those with the teaching faculties and school authorities, but also with the parents of migrant experienced children and intercultural assistants. And we're going to showcase some effects of our joint labor across last summer. Our main objective was to develop a set of best practices and recommendations which could support schools, school authorities and teaching faculties or school staff who deal with integration of pupils with migrant experience into the school and local communities, but also to exchange experiences and know-how, because before the very process we didn't have any qualitative or quantitative research, but we based it on the reports that had existed. So our workshop objective was to combine those two communities and to exchange know-how and experiences, and such elements have been also made part of this report. We followed the design thinking method. This methodology postulates the solution of complex issues which cannot be dealt with in a simple manner. It requires interdisciplinary cross-cultural teams to offer a solution, and was divided into stages. The first stage is the empathization, so the exchange of experiences and garnering as much of information as possible to fill the shoes of those persons who will then use the solutions which will be developed. Then we defined the chief issues and we translated those into challenges, because in design thinking we don't use issues, we speak of challenges which need to be tackled. Then we engaged our participants into offering solutions, so generate solutions. And at the first stage there were very very many such ideas. Such ideas had sometimes been in effect, and they shared what had been functioning at the schools or organizations just to exchange this information. We selected those that we considered in the workshops to be the most useful, but also the most pleasant to implement, because those had to be such ideas that our participants want to develop further, and we prepared idea cards to share those with teaching staff and parents, and via testing based on testing solutions or conclusions, we formulated the final shape of recommendations for schools. Speaking of the report, initially we garnered some basic facts. As we know, education is compulsory in Poland until one turns 18, also for all those with migrant experience, and such pupils have access to the same education system and to the same opportunities of development as part of the education system in Poland, but they also have extra support, i.e. Polish lessons or catch-up lessons, or remedial lessons, and schools can also employ intercultural assistants, be it on their own payrolls or projects developed by NGOs, and they could also fine-tune their curricula for such individual needs of some students or pupils. And despite the fact, these are the facts, it's not always, or the picture is not always as pretty as painted. And we have nominated some basic problem areas that arose in this experience exchange. The first of those was just the integration process. Speaking of the presence of the school system in the integration, it's really important. The school not only allows one to catch up on the cultural or linguistic differences, but also to include one in the local community and integrate in the environment. And the school also sees those intercultural assistants as really fundamental persons who support persons in integrating themselves into the community, and it is an issue to see an improved availability of such assistants at schools, but also to reduce the number of students working with a single assistant so that such a person doesn't find themselves overburdened. And also the unnoticed needs, i.e. the needs of pupils, which are very often not noticed. It's about migrant children who not often suffer from major problems or language barriers, and that's why they are approached in a different manner, and they could struggle with more specialist language users or persons with special needs, like those with disabilities, and also distance learning, which has exposed large technical exclusion amongst the group. Next slide, please. Oh, another one. And the third area was the aspect of pupil potential, which is decreased because the language barrier means their access to the schooling system is not the same as for those who are fluent in Polish. So it's a matter of language barrier, technical or digital exclusion, but also the assessment system or exam system to be fine-tuned to their needs. We spoke of a number of perspectives. The first one was an official perspective, and here the most important need which came to the surface was the need for information exchange and experience exchange amongst all the stakeholders being parts of the integration, not only of the officers, NGOs, but also parents and pupils. The second perspective was a teacher's perspective, and here we noticed specific tools or the need for such tools or standards or systemic solutions, specific guidelines which they could follow and feel more confident, and so that they don't suffer from this feeling of lack of support or being underinformed. And the third perspective was the parents' perspective, because we'd also invited those to be part of those co-creative workshops. And the need of the parent was mostly the care of the child and to provide them with all the possible support, but also support to the parent in complying with procedures and to inform them of what they should do. And some of the ideas we'd offered were regular meetings between officials and school directors or principals to exchange information, but also to prepare this basic handbook with information for parents or schools, or the school sets which would contain textbooks and other materials which would be necessary in the first few days for such pupils. Also, ready lesson plans so that teachers know how to integrate pupils as part of their community, and also specific recommendations to follow in the process of integrating a child into a school community. And also allow me just to show you that in the course of those recommendations, and please also do consult the reports, we've got some detailed stages which should be followed by each and every staff member, be them an official, school authorities member, or teaching faculty, or a parent, so that a pupil could be included into a community as well as possible. And we've also designed day one at school, or the first week, suggesting some activities that could take place in school so that a pupil feels part of the community and more self-confident. And also, concluding, I would like to invite you to consult the reports, but now I'd like to move on to the debate based on this report. And now we could just show you the last of the slides, because I've got some recommendations I would like to debate with you today, just to see successful cooperation with all those organizations. And effective communication is key. And I think in the course of the meetings before this debate, we agreed that this experience and knowledge exchange in real time is fundamental, and it yields very positive results to combine the competencies of all the stakeholders, not only of the teaching faculty, of city or town officials, but also parents and the teaching faculty, and to jointly work out solutions every day. And I would like to talk about it with you today, since we've managed to diagnose a number of issues in the process. And we are, I believe, going to talk about such issues, but I'd like to focus on those existing best practices that you're familiar with from your daily experience, so that we could exchange those and to inspire those who are following this debate and who would like to implement those in their practice, but so that those persons know what to look for, even if some people are just blissfully unaware that solutions exist to some issues. So first, a general question. Which chief barriers would you say you come across in your daily practice, speaking of pupil integration with migrant experience? And I would like to ask Vaya with Migrant Support Center, who has a lot of systemic know-how to share.
Hello, can you hear me? For the past 3 years, I've been part of a major regional project dedicated to education system in the Pomeranian voivodeship, and naturally, its focus is primarily on Gdańsk, as this is where most of the migrant children are. Speaking of barriers, this large threefold growth, possibly even larger this year, has coincided with the relentless barrage of changes that the schools suffer. So we have the education reform, which has negatively affected especially the double stacked year. Secondly, the pandemic changes, so the remote learning, which has abruptly reduced the possibilities to learn Polish through peer contact and informal relations. And thirdly, the change that is now being overhauled by the minister, which is also consisting of depriving schools of autonomy and decision-making powers. School competencies are being limited in this regard, and I believe this is the main obstacle for implementing good practices. Second barrier is that we have no knowledge about each other, we have no news, we learn of other people through informal channels, and these are good solutions that we come across often by chance, and thus we waste our resources. There is no systemic approach. Teachers receive no support. They're immediately simply cast into the situation without much feedback. There's a lot of superficial and thinking and stereotypes. And if the majority of children come from the countries that are geographically near Poland, then culturally they must be also not that far, and so the children will somehow manage. And this leaves the teacher alone to handle the class, the immigrants, and his entire workload. Often this teacher receives information that his class will be joined by immigrant children only a few days before the start of the academic year, or even in the duration, which leaves him with no time to prepare adequately. On the other hand, there are no mechanisms that would allow the school to prepare for receiving such children. Steps are taken only once such a child appears at a school. Additionally, our education system is unprepared. We're missing the tools. In Gdańsk, things are slightly different and a bit better, but in general, in our education system, we can support the child for 12 months, but what then? What happens next? Children have different rates of learning. Then there are those pivotal moments, such as the 4th grade, when separate school subjects appear. Then there is grade 7 and 8, where additional classes are added and exams. And then there is the secondary school period. So these moments are often dramatic for children, and all of a sudden new vocational subjects appear, and in some classes, as the children say, they don't even open their textbook because they can't understand the word, and these children are offered for as long as 3 years in our school. So, and yet theoretically this child requires no support. In secondary schools in Gdańsk, children do receive this support, but this is an exceptional situation. In other schools, children are deprived of this situation, of such support. So this leaves the teacher helpless. And in the countries that are geographically near Poland, we think that perhaps repeating a class seems like a good idea, and educationally wise, it is a good idea. But in Russia, Ukraine, or Belarus, this carries a heavy stigma that stays for the entire life, and we see much resistance from a child and from the parent against such solution. And also, we seem to miss ideas how to prepare children for a repeated year. I see that Ms. Ola agrees strongly. Would you like to contribute on the matter of barriers for efficient integration? Yes. Yes, I do agree. I work at a school with little experience with immigrant children. We only had a single pupil. We're a small private school. And thinking of repeated classes, there was no need for such solutions, but I did hear that it's a very difficult solution. And the immigrant children tend to be very ambitious and try to cope at all costs. And repeated class is not just a matter of cultural stigma, but it also requires adaptation to a new class and a new teacher, and this is yet another factor that additionally complicates the matters. Ola, would you like to add something? Yes, I'm listening to what Ms. Vaya said, and I do agree with her because our school is also part of the project implemented by the Immigrant Support Center, and had it not been for this support, the situation of our pupils would have been much more precarious. But what we are missing, and I'd like to refer to the presentation here, is this model that we should follow upon receiving a child at school and incorporating it into the community. I feel certain resistance against this model, and please let me tell how we handle the situation at our school. There's a point that reads the pupils' needs analysis. That is listed at the end of the model, and for me, this is something that should be at the very beginning, and this is the pattern that we follow at our school. Of course, apart from the preparation work with the teaching faculty and trainings on diversity, but from the individual's perspective, when a child comes to school, and as Ms. Vaya commented, this is not always the case that we have time to do it properly. I'm a principal at a major school, and we had around 60 children with immigrant background, and in this week we accepted 5 more. So we simply have no time at all. But for the child to be properly supported, we need to first analyze its needs. And what we do is we invite the child and the parents for an interview, and to avoid a situation where a child comes to a class in which we know that it will be difficult to adapt to, and knowing the stigma carried by repeating classes, before we start talking with the parents, we can accept the child to 1 year below its age, and this is what we determine based on the competencies of a child. So if we see that these competencies are insufficient or practically null, we start by preparing the parents to accept a child to a class that's 1 year below its age. We also take great care that a child is not sent to a class which has no other immigrant children, or which has too many immigrants already. What I've missed in the presentation and these results is the following. We focus on the exchange of information between various offices, institutions, schools, etc. But we, I believe, tend to forget about the parents in this entire chain. They are a very important source of information, and there's a need for regular meetings also with the parents, because integrating a pupil in school requires effort of the entire family, and we need to support the parents too. And school is often the first office or which the parents reach in our country, and unless we know in what conditions this child functions, and unless we're able to identify the issues in its family environment, and I'm not referring exclusively to material issues, which unfortunately are rather prevalent, but unless we get information on what caused the migration, we'll find it extremely difficult to work with this family. And often this information is something that we will not receive in the first meeting. And to gain access to such pieces of information, we need to build up the relations with the entire family. So to conclude, in our school, we use the methodology of working with migrant children in a limited model that we use also for children with special educational needs. So we hold regular meetings, we monitor the progress, and at least once per semester, as we're a big school, we want to meet with all the team members, so to say, of the school, so the teachers, the pupil, the parents, and everyone who may contribute to the process of integration. Thank you for this, because you answered to my question, my next question, which is about the good practices. And I believe that this exchange of information will also help to build trust and allow us to solve the problem more easily. But I'd like to ask Ms. Natalia about this perspective of pupils and parents, because I know that she can offer valuable insight on the matter. First, I'd like to say that I am running with a skin infection, and I'm feeling very bad, but then again, I decided to come here since this topic is very serious, and I wanted to take off my mask to show that I'm open to debate. I've been living in Poland for the past 7 years, and I've experienced integration and adaptation not only as an immigrant and a woman, but also as a mother who came with a 8-year-old child. And this child started its education in the 2nd grade. Now the child is in the 1st grade of secondary school. And for the past 3 years, I've been working in school number 1 as an expert and coordinator for children with immigrant background. As a coordinator, I work on all the educational grades from preschool to 8th grade, and currently I have 100 pupils in my school. 95 of them are with immigrant background, and 5 of them are re-immigrants. And I must say that these 5 cause much more issues than the remaining 95. These children come from families in which one of the parents is an immigrant, a foreigner, and the other one is Pole. The issue consists of children having no knowledge of Polish at all. Also, the children with immigrant background who arrive from other countries. For instance, in my school, it's mainly children from Ukraine, but also from Belarus and Russia. But the majority comes from Ukraine. And as it's been already mentioned by Ms. Patricia and Ms. Agata and my colleague from school, the major issue is the language barrier. Secondly, the psychological and emotional issues. We also see problems arising from cultural differences, but also from differences in education system. And it's crucial to provide support not only for the schools, the teaching faculty, but also to the parent and the child. From my own experience as a mother, I must say that I found it difficult even to send the child to school. The first problem was how to get the children to enroll to school. It was 7 years ago, so there weren't as many immigrants back then, and on this very same day, in the same city, 2 schools set near from each other sent me back saying, come back with a translator and then we can talk. I had to leave my country without prior planning, and I was not willing to. I was seeking refuge, and I had 10 days to do it. So often it is the parent who takes the decision, while the child is simply thrown into the deep. And not every child is ready to do it, and not every child is capable of leaving the comfort zone and requires a great deal of support. It's a major challenge both for a school, but also for the parent and for the child. It's absolutely crucial that for the child to feel important and secure at school, to feel it's not lost. A lot of children come with great potential and ambitions, with a lot of skills that can contribute and enrich the country, but due to language barrier, and my children are fortunate to have a coordinator at school available at all times and with whom they can talk in a language they understand. And when the coordinator can actually diagnose the individual needs of the children, because we need individual approach to every child to help this child grow. Secondly, as we've mentioned, we need the class to be prepared. This is a great responsibility of the lead teacher, that they prepare not just the new child but also the pupils in the class. Is also what's important is whether the school is open to foreigners or not, so that the children do not feel excluded, that they can join this class community and also school community, that they can show their potential, that they are involved in various school and class initiatives. I'll speak of good practices as a coordinator. I start the introduction by meeting with parents. If it's before the 1st of September, this meeting depends on how many children are enrolled. First, we talk to the parents. In this interview, I want to learn of the needs of the parents, of the children, and how may I be of assistance. This introduction of a new pupil often, when it takes part during the school year, it's fine, but it's much more difficult to prepare it if it happens before the 1st of September and the beginning of the school year. After talking to parents, I always talk individually with every child, regardless of whether it's one child or 20. I always try to find time to talk individually with a child and ask whether the child wants to be here, whether it's stressed, whether it's preoccupied or afraid in any way, and is there a way I can help. Because when I asked my own son, when did you stop worrying or being afraid of the new school? He said that it was the moment when he found friends. And it's crucial, especially for adolescents, to find this friendly support, because sometimes the family and its authority is moving to the background, and what becomes important is the peers environment. And it's crucial to support the child at this stage. For instance, we may have a child that is about to go to the first grade. He experiences the same issues as a Polish child. But if we have a child who's 12 years old, not only it needs to cope with its adolescence issues or puberty issues, but it also enters a new environment and has no friends and no colleagues. Please allow me to interrupt. This integration at school is very important, also due to psychological issues. And it's good that we touched upon these good practices, because I'd like to move on to these comments. And now I'm looking at Ms. Joanna, who's with us remotely. And I'd like to talk about good experiences, good practices of exchanging information on diagnosis, and what is it specifically that we can offer our teachers. And I believe that Ms. Joanna can share some insights on the issue, on the idea that was developed in the process.
Good afternoon, everyone. I've joined you remotely this time. I couldn't just come in person. Allow me to Joanna Grubaciaro. And I've joined you because with Agata and other persons, I was part of the workshop process. And we assessed those needs together and spoke of those educational needs. And I believe everything that has been said today, allow me just to speak on a personal level, because I'm truly impressed how in such a short time so many of the most important matters have actually come to the surface. All those that we have been pursuing in small steps, we've been speaking of those needs. And Natalia outlined fantastically the entire process which takes place in the parents, and my four speakers have spoken about the process with relations to the teaching faculty and NGOs. We talked about all that in the course of the workshops, and we were wondering what and how, in what way and how we could support this educational community as a whole in migrant-related situations. We've spoken of some best practices, but also worst practices. We know that institutional support is weak. Until recently, I'd worked with the City Hall of Gdańsk, especially in education and migrant integration in the community of the schools of Gdańsk. And throughout that period and before, I had seen a lot of a mess, actually, I must say, that no one centrally or institutionally had holistically taken charge of the support, at least information supports, or any training support of financial or technical supports of the school communities in the entire process, one struggling with all the issues arising when we have an entire families with migrant background. And now just allow me to talk you through everything that's been ongoing following the workshops. Now I've been working together with the City Council and the City Hall as an external expert on migration, and I've been requested to compile some sets, I would say textbooks or handbooks for 3 groups of persons, like school officials, also pupils and parents. And I've been developing 3 such handbooks, which will comprise 2 parts to them, i.e. the information part, which explains the basic facts, which also include a brief description of the most important matters and processes of receiving families that Natalia has just spoken about, and also written in a simple, non-technical manner, and without this entire teaching aspect to it, because it's not our role. Our role is to support those 3 groups so that they function well in the school environment. It's important that principals and form teachers are fully aware of how to conduct themselves in this new situation, how to welcome and how to receive and welcome those families with a migration experience, so that they feel welcome, and so that principals and also form teachers know that they are supported. And also parents, that we've seen as important since the very beginning of the workshop, so that persons with migrant experience feel this freedom and move around freely in the process. That's why we put together those handbooks, and that's why each and every of those handbooks or sets will have part 2 to it, the so-called checklist, which will help families find out which documents they have to submit where and by when, what they need to be aware of when sending kids to school, and so that form teachers know what they can and should demand and how to support those new parents and pupils in the new situation. So I could say much more about it, but I wouldn't like to hog the floor. What is important is that I provide the actual contents on merits, and that will have been completed by the end of this year. And then I will work with the social development department, and we will address schools, organizations, and parents of the migrant community in Gdańsk to opine my actual handbooks. And all these sets are developed based on the recommendations that had been worked out in the course of the workshops. And all the materials which have been developed across Poland, be it in Warsaw, Lublin, Białystok, which had been developed by educators and teachers. So, yes, we want to act, and we are planning to support the school community with expertise and recommendations on how to act in Gdańsk schools with those new residents of Gdańsk. Thank you, Asia, for your contribution. We're being rushed by time, and I believe we could talk forever about this issue. And actually, we have talked for a few hours before this meeting, but I would like to provide a platform to the youngest representative on the panel, whose perspective should be the most important, i.e. the pupil perspective, and to ask you for a few sentences of comment. What do you find of the essence when you enter this brand new reality? At first, I must say that I moved to Poland almost 3 years ago, so it's all a relatively recent matter for us. And speaking from this perspective of just a few years, as now, and throughout this conversation and this presentation, I keep having this actual flashback, because what I was missing, because actually this guideline would be truly helpful. And Also speaking of the second year or repeating my form, and I had to repeat my form, and I'm grateful for the experience because that helped me cope with the stress, and I was accepted to one of the best schools in Gdańsk, and that nurtured the development of my ambitions and my talent. And speaking of the rest, I also think it's truly priceless, but the relations and having something to do is fundamental, because whenever we find ourselves in a new reality, we need to find our feet. And I did that by nurturing my interests. I took up the guitar and I progressed a lot in a very short time. And just as I progressed in my school endeavors, and I believe we just need to focus on the positives and tangible matters so that we see the results and short-term effects, and that aids you psychologically whenever you see that you're doing something well and good, then you just progress. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank to all of you panelists for sitting and contributing to this debate. I believe Monika is going to comment further. I think it's just early days of our cooperation, and we are going to keep meeting again, exchange best practices, and jointly work hand in hand. Monika, I give up the floor to you. I would just like to say that you can continue for 5 minutes. So we got a moment, haven't we? Correct. Great. Since we've been awarded this additional 5 minutes, I would just like to ask you to conclude on a happier note, not just to talk about issues, but also of best practices and solutions. Vaya, because I believe you're working on another series of meetings where we'll work together. If you could just talk us through that. On the 14th and 15th of December, we are holding an educational conference that I invite you all to. It's going to be held online, and you can register on Teacher Education Center. So all websites, all those who are interested in education are welcome, but it's also going to be dedicated to some innovative skills which would require physical presence. So we couldn't do it because of the pandemic. And this is peer tutoring, not only as a remedial vehicle, but I would say a youth intercultural assistant, a person who supports a peer in finding their feet amongst their peers. And I think it's a breakthrough development just to consider that and how we could have those youth intercultural assistants prepared to work with their peers. And another matter that takes place for the first time, and we are going to invite persons and share knowledge, is teaching Polish as a foreign language as a profession, as a teaching profession, because we haven't had much of that until now, but the children are growing up, and we have ever more such pupils in secondary schools. We have a secondary school in Gdańsk whereby 30% of the enrolled pupils are migrant background pupils. It's a secondary vocational school, and we just need to debate how to teach Polish as a foreign language and how to make it part of the teaching provision, because it's a challenge. Sometimes it happens that each and every word, especially in technical class, that each and every word is seen as a foreign language, and we can say that those children at the same time learn 2 other foreign languages, so they have like 3 foreign languages at the same time. So we could actually also reform schools so that the second language could be Russian or Ukrainian, i.e. the languages that migrant children mostly speak, the children who come to Gdańsk, which boosts their potential, but also boosts their competitiveness on the labor market, because this language is a currently highly deserved language on the job market. If I could contribute, so I, as a migrant, I'd like to add that it would be a best practice, respectively of this being a tertiary school or secondary or primary school. It's
quite common just to find out how many international children or pupils there are in your schools, so that the answer to this question would be we only have pupils in our school. International doesn't matter. And also, you've spoken about cultural competencies, because it's not just skills, but the attitude, essentially, so that it takes place. And when we were receiving students with migrant backgrounds, and we were thinking why it actually worked, because we teach our pupils, we teach openness to our pupils, and not having experienced migrant pupils join our community, but as a rule, we would just like to work with our pupils on the general openness and celebrating diversity, appreciating diversity on a daily basis, not just when an international pupil is going to join the community. Also, to comment on what you've spoken about, those recommendations and stages we worked out, that assessment was the final stage, but all those stages should be circular, iterative, so training, preparation, assessment, so such assessment should be ongoing, not just as a one-off, to keep reassessing if actual interventions see any effects. Would you like to contribute? I would like to comment on what Ola has said. This attitude of openness. Very often, openness issue is not with the children, but in the adults. And we need to bear in mind that the school is for everyone. It's not just for pupils, they spend the most time there, but the school is also for the teaching faculty and for parents. And we need to make sure it's a common space and to invite parents to contribute to the school. And what we've done, but the pandemic has interrupted, unfortunately. We had the school open on a single afternoon now, but after the pandemic, we'd like to have it open to everyone on a daily basis. We've got this maritime school after hours. So for now, it's a single afternoon a week. Parents are invited to come with children to school without any class planned. We've just got a space to meet, and we could share competencies and knowledge. And so that, first of all, the parents can just get to know each other, because very often parents with migrant background have no way of building such relations, so they could actually get to know other parents, not only when there's a parent-teacher meeting, but they can also find out more about school, because we have some tea or coffee, everyone brings something. It could be a dessert or a local dish, or we just knit together, and it turns out that different patterns are used across different regions or countries. So it's just being together, which means that this openness of the school community flourishes and is much better. And I also agree with Natalia that I would like to see that in Polish school we just see pupils, not just pupils and pupils of background, migrant background or special educational needs. Thank you very much for this contribution. I just see this Finnish model where after hours the school turns itself into the heart of the local community. And I believe this is the avenue we should pursue. Thank you very much for your contribution to this panel and for the exchange of information experience. I see we need to conclude. I give up the floor. Thank you very much. Let's give it up to them. It was wildly exciting, and I was following it from the point of view of a person who has a family with migrant background abroad, and for us it's also exciting and exhilarating just to follow it, how our Polish children, what they can experience abroad, because it works both ways. Thank you very much. This panel was really incredibly exciting, and I hope we come back to this topic. And the conference takes place on the 14th and 15th of December, doesn't it? I believe it's going to be an important event, and we join in the request that you enroll on this conference. Thank you very much. And now we invite Madam Chair, Monika Hinz, who is just getting fidgety. Monica, now, as we are concluding, which is not a conclusion, it's just the beginning of the end, Monica has set out on the task to summarize the day and the vast extent of opinions, thoughts, and debates and discussions that we've had here on stage, but also on Hopin, on a platform. Monica, the floor is yours.
Serdecznie dziękuję. Dokładnie to słowo wyborowe to jest.
These words of bold attempt are very adequate, especially that the challenge for today was the fact that we're online and in the studio. So I've been partially here, partially online. And what I'd like to say is that all these talks, because I like to focus on the talks, I missed the good practices panel since I've been here, but I'm definitely going to review all the materials after our meeting. I'd like to mention 3 slogans: the planet, partnership, and leadership. Without going into much detail, I believe that in each of these panels and in each of these talks, we've had at least one sentence that will definitely stick in our minds as the participants. We know that as part of our gamification, the Grivit game, you had the opportunity to share your insights, and we will collect them all and put them into something interesting and send them back to you. We'd also like to learn of your feedback as participants. What I take away is that each of these talks have left a mark, and something that's definitely stuck with me most profoundly is what Przemek Staroński said about perception. And we often say that we ask ourselves how to find leaders, how do we create favorable environment for change, and Przemek said that these people are out there, we simply fail to see them. And I believe that from the very start and until the end of this fascinating panel, but the migration issue is something that I've experienced a crash course in, and it's very moving for me and very important for me. And we as UP Foundation want to become involved in this issue, and we want to create a space. A lot has been said about partnership between school, children, teachers, parents, and other supporting institutions. And I believe that that's what the intersectoral partnership is about. It may be built in various fields across various sectors, and migration is one of them. So once again, thank you for all this valuable insight, and I'm definitely deeply inspired, and I do hope that you share this feeling. And I'm back staying here with the forum and the foundation, and with that I'll conclude. And you all know me well, so you know that I'll be speaking spontaneously and adequately to the those who are left here. I know that you're all waiting for the results of gamification. Please, I'd like to ask someone on my left-hand side. There are 2 bouquets. If you could please hand them. They're all ready for transport. Thank you for unpacking. So I'd like to express my most heartfelt thank you to Dorota and Małgosia, without whom we definitely wouldn't have pulled it off. It's a pleasure to be here with you. We've learned a great deal. So I'd like to start with with a thank you.
Bardzo serdecznie dziękuję.
So
I myślę, że teraz jest
now is the good moment
momencik. Zanim przejdę do...
before I move on to the results of the gamification, because once I'm there, those who are online will probably switch off or leave us. So I'll start with a thank you to our partners, and I'll ask Ola to support me. I'll be disappearing from your view, so I ask all the online viewers for understanding. I'd like to ask LPP, Ms. Patricia and Ms. Evelina, to come closer. I hope that Ergo Hestia is with us.
Dobrze. Tutaj w naszym studiu mamy po prostu tutaj też fajne
In our studio, we have all sorts of secret spots. We'd like to thank the LPP company in the person of Ewelina Damc and Patrycja Zbitniewska for all the support, financial support, grants for creating the fund, for being with us, and you're with us as leaders. And this is fantastic for us because we can always turn to you for consultations on how to award a grant, create a film. You're simply out there for us. So this is for your company, and we have smaller houses for yourselves. Thank you very much. Also, in our head office in Łąkowa, we have same houses, so I'm sure we'll find space to accommodate this special house we've received from you. And let the insects flourish among the greenery. And Ms. Dominika, insect house for the Ergo Hestia company. You've joined us this year. We're very happy to have you on board, and we do hope that our business partners milieu will continue to grow, and other partners are probably now busy with good practices and gamification, so we have no other representatives. But nonetheless, thank you very much, and we invite you to further collaboration. And now I'd like to spontaneously invite the person who, for the past years, has been taking care and consulting and supervising all the contests. So Natalia Siuda-Piotrowska, please join us on stage.
W zasadzie Natalia jest...
Natalia is here in a double role. I'll take care of the house. That's what our forum is all about. As you can see, we're highly informal. So thank you. If it weren't for the circumstances, I'd definitely give a hug to the young fella, but still. Thank you for this house. I'm definitely going to put it in our garden. We'll find a special spot. And since I'm at the microphone and the situation is spontaneous, I'd like the girls from the FIR team to join me.
Przepraszam, że zaburzam porządek.
Sorry for interrupting.
I bardzo chciałybyśmy Ci oficjalnie, Monika, podziękować.
We'd like to thank you for these 10 years and for everything you did for us. So I'm very moved and I'm at loss of words, but thank you for everything and all the wise words. You'll find them inside, and I hope you'll find a moment to enjoy the gifts. Excellent. And we'll also be communicating the expression of gratitude from Mr. Marshall Struck to the council of our conference. And I'm looking at our guests here, so I'd like to invite Marzena Sternawska and Tomek Limon, because they are also persons who come to my mind when I think of the forum, and perhaps they are a bit more distant in Warsaw, but they've been with us. Marzena, thank you. When thinking of forum, I think of you, I think of Tomek, and I'm happy to have you here in spite of all the obligations you have. A house, a little one for you. And now we'll move on to the conclusion of gamification. And with that, I'd like to take over the phone. And albeit mobilely, I'll conclude the competition.
Slajd z voucherem ośrodka Jantar i zaprosić też panią Iwonę jeszcze raz. Może razem po prostu ogłosimy te wyniki. Oczywiście przekazujących nagrody jest dużo więcej. Pokazywałam te nagrody też wcześniej, aczkolwiek z racji tego, że to jest główna nagroda, taka największa, najwyższej wartości, to pani Iwono może przeczyta pani pierwszą trójkę.
Dobrze. Pani Aleksandra Kul, pani Agata Lew i Jola Spo.
Tak, i to w ogóle może też przejmę. To nie są pełne nazwiska, to są bardziej takie, powiedzmy, gamingowe inicjały, takie zajawki z uwagi na RODO, wiadomo, tutaj tajne przez poufne, natomiast ze wszystkimi się skontaktujemy i przekażemy też pani Agnieszce informacje na temat vouchera.
Ja serdecznie zapraszam do ośrodka, czyli pani Agnieszka, tak?
Tak, pani Agnieszka.
Czekamy na panią.
Dokładnie. Także dziękuję pani Iwono. Ja wcześniej pokazywałam, ale jeszcze raz pokażę, jak to wiadomo, kobieta. Zawsze takie elementy gadżetowe, ciuchowe. Pomimo oczywiście less waste, zero waste są bardzo ważne, ale tak tutaj prezentują się torby. I nie będę już czytała, kto je jakby odkryje i co w nich odkryje. Na pewno odkryje również vouchery, mówiłam też o tym wcześniej. Wszystkie nagrody zgodnie po prostu z punktacją państwo otrzymacie, zostaną przekazane tuż po forum, także proszę się też do nas odzywać, my będziemy na pewno do was się odzywać także. Także dziękujemy bardzo za udział w gamifikacji. Powiem szczerze, że znam tylko te podium i te pierwsze miejsca, będę obserwować czujnie po forum, jak wyglądała grywalizacja w ogóle i będziemy na pewno się odzywać. Ja ze swojej strony dziękuję przekazującym nagrody, ale też dziękuję firmie Grywit i serdecznie, i to nie jest żadna ukryta reklama, my naprawdę tą grę stworzyliśmy bardzo szybko, co oznacza, że bardzo polecam tego partnera do podobnych wyzwań. Naprawdę szacunek duży za to, co razem z nami stworzyli. Także dziękuję bardzo. I myślę sobie, że podziękowania dla zespołu zrobimy chyba w bardziej taki kuluarowy sposób, a teraz poproszę panie prowadzące jeszcze.
Dobrze się składa, jeśli mówisz o podziękowaniach. Droga Moniko, zostań z nami. Zapraszamy również cały zespół Fundacji Inicjowania Rozwoju. Szanowni Państwo, jeśli 10. jubileusz, to urodziny, a jeśli urodziny, no to musi być tort. Czy tort mógłby teraz wjechać?
Czekamy
już
na to.
Już jedzie, był sygnał.
Ale jeszcze poprosimy tutaj Tomka Limona.
Tomku, chodź do nas. W imieniu partnerów i przyjaciół forum. Moniko, zapraszamy cię tutaj.
Również idę.
Patrz, jedzie.
Jest.
Jest taka duża świeczka. Ona jest jedna, ale symbolizuje 10.
Tak jest, jedzie tort. Poprosimy o zrobienie miejsca, może tam krzesełka da się jakoś odsunąć. Tort jedzie, a my w tym czasie, droga Moniko, drogi zespole, wiem, że zespół jest jeszcze rozproszony, jest sporo osób na backstage'u. serdeczne życzenia z okazji tych 10. urodzin i gratulacje, ale przede wszystkim chcemy Wam podziękować. Podziękować za te 10 lat Waszej ciężkiej pracy, zaangażowania, determinacji, pracy wokół bardzo ważnych tematów. Dziękujemy Wam za to, że tak pięknie opowiadacie nam i zapraszacie nas do dyskusji na bardzo ważne tematy, często trudne, ale bardzo ważne. Dziękujemy, że tak pięknie nas edukujecie w tych obszarach. Jedzie, jest w całości nadal.
Dziękujemy także, że nas inspirujecie.
Inspirujecie, że tyle tu dobrego się zadziało.
To jest naprawdę spontanicznie.
Ale przede wszystkim... Czy to może wjechać jakoś tak bardziej tu? Tak? Dobrze. Ryzykowne dosyć, ale niech będzie. Pięknie dziękujemy. Tak jest. Że przy tym forum nas tak pięknie łączycie. Łączycie przedstawicieli organizacji pozarządowych z biznesem, my tutaj organizacje też pracodawców, także przedstawicieli samorządów. Forum Inicjowania Rozwoju 10 lat. Myślę, że możecie spojrzeć jak gdyby w tył z poczuciem ogromnego sukcesu, bo dużo rozwoju się tutaj zainicjowało i będzie jeszcze inicjować. Piękne podziękowania, gratulacje. No i prosimy o więcej już dzisiaj. Z niecierpliwością czekamy na 11. forum i wszystkich Państwa serdecznie
I
zapraszamy.
poprosimy Monikę o pokrojenie tortu.
Tak jest.
Monika.
Tak. Ja właśnie chciałam powiedzieć, że widzę ten tort tutaj przed sobą i wiem, że nie widzicie go Państwo teraz i że pewnie elementy tego wydarzenia dzisiaj są też dla Was właśnie dokładnie spontaniczne. Mam nadzieję, że jesteście z nami jeszcze. Dość zaskakujące. Takie jest to forum, to jest jubileusz, także proszę nam to wybaczyć. Mam nadzieję, że będzie to dobry balans dla całej części merytorycznej. Trochę być może uśmiechu na twarzy również, także dziękujemy bardzo. W imieniu tutaj całego zespołu myślę mogę podziękować. Dziękuję serdecznie też może przy okazji wykorzystam ten czas, ponieważ forum jakby budujemy naszym tutaj zespołem, który w tym takim składzie właśnie Państwo widzicie, natomiast tak naprawdę tutaj na tej sali jest mnóstwo osób, które od początku też to forum z nami budują. Jest ekipa multimedialna, jest firma Multistudio, jest firma Artron. Tak naprawdę jak cofam się w przeszłość, to dokładnie to jest 10 lat temu również tutaj razem robiliśmy pierwsze forum. Także to jest niesamowite, że jednak te nasze drogi się po prostu tutaj tak idealnie łączą dość. Także dziękujemy bardzo za cierpliwość do nas w dniu dzisiejszym.
Dziękuję bardzo. Tutaj masz nóż.
A dobrze, tak oficjalnie. Nie wiem, czy to widać.
Szanowni Państwo, zatem my tu przystępujemy do krojenia i konsumpcji tego wielkiego tortu. Niniejszym oficjalnie zamykamy 10. jubileuszowe Forum Inicjowania Rozwoju i zapraszamy za rok.
Dziękujemy
Zapraszamy
bardzo.
Państwa również. Zanim nastąpi 11. forum, zapraszamy Państwa do wspierania i fundacji i...
Tak, dokładnie. Zapraszamy do wspierania, zapraszamy do udziału w naszych spotkaniach, szkoleniach, warsztatach. Wszystko robimy w partnerstwie, także jest międzysektorowo, więc każdy znajdzie tak naprawdę coś wartościowego dla siebie. Dziękujemy.
Dziękujemy bardzo.